a very, very common one where things break down. It's great that we all kind of understand where we're heading as an organization, but all of a sudden somebody does what you perceive to be your work, or all of a sudden something drops and doesn't get done, and it should have been somebody doing something. It's one of those things, the whole clarity of roles and processes, whereby we can very quickly lose trust or erode trust when it's not really worked on intentionally, when we don't all appreciate what we're doing or really understand where everybody's at in that space. Now, once we have those three driving elements really kind of ready, the whole resultant conditions of trust, diversity, inclusion, commitment, accountability, and ultimately learning and continuous improvement, they can then flourish. They can then kind of really kind of excel or move forward. And that trust, specifically perspective, it's really, of course, dependent on where we come from a personality perspective in terms of how we can initially interpret the word, and then how we kind of usually initially relate to the concept. So let's take a more of a detailed look at some of these concepts, and then we'll open up for a conversation, certainly, as we always do. And by the way, if anybody kind of at any point has anything to add, and again, some of you have already been through these sessions before and just kind of think that it's going to be a great addition to the group, you're absolutely welcome to contribute. So first of all, let's define the concepts in a bit more depth. When we talk about trust and psychological safety, trust, we could say, is the belief in the reliability, integrity, and competence of others. And again, depending on where we're at from an e-colors perspective, reliability is going to look perhaps, in a way for some of us and a bit differently to others. For example, for me, somebody reliable could be more about making sure that somebody kind of keeps their, you could say, a positive sentiment towards, if I think they're trustworthy. Reliability for others could be the capability to deliver on a given task. Of course, if it's maybe more of a human emotional aspect to things, or more of a rational, or you could say intellectual, but potentially rather than emotional, or non-emotional aspect of how we are all, relating to trust. And then we have psychological safety, which is the perception that one can speak up and take risk without the fear of negative consequences. So you're potentially looking at an environment where we can make a mistake and yet, not really be punished for it, rather just move forward as a team and learn, which is really a key concept also of when it comes to human organizational performance principles that we're going to be looking into today. Now, when it comes to types of trust, and we start to kind of see a little bit of that e-colors dynamic play in, we can look at competency-based trust, and we can look at relational-based trust. Now, if somebody asks you, do you trust someone? What comes to mind? Like, what is your first variable to realize or to think or to analyze if somebody's trustworthy? Let's have a few answers, and let's kind of really be keen or considering our different e-colors when we answer that. What is the kind of thing that comes to mind when you're assessing if somebody's trustworthy? Carrie, I think you unmuted.
Yeah, I think my initial reaction in my mind, and this was a big part of my previous corporate life in banking, is the feeling of safety in respect to your relationship with them, at the top level. That's how trust kind of computes or translated to
So what
what
made you
that
feel
looks like
safe
for me.
and that's great. What made you feel safe with that kind of given individual director, or you mentioned, that kind of relationship? What were some of the elements that they established safety for you?
Yeah, I think how they would manage conflict situations would be an example of that within either the team or, say, maybe not conflict, also just difficult situations. So performance management, how they would deal with that, whether that would be myself or other individuals that I worked with. Experience, right? The experience of working with them, how they demonstrated their behaviors and how they manage certain situations, I think would be how I would, I would think about that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carrie. And again, I'm hearing very much something that aligns with myself in terms of how people show up from a perspective of how they treat others, how they portray themselves in certain situations that, I could perceive as conflicting or maybe, high consequence. how people respond or frankly react in those environments or those situations means a lot to me in terms of showing if somebody's trustworthy. So
Yeah, same here.
thank you for
Yellow,
that.
blue.
All right. Anybody else? Any other perspectives or thoughts?
Yeah, I could say something, David. This is Matthew.
Hi, Matthew. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, so I think maybe reinforces a little bit what Kerry had said. I think it's a lot, for me, it's all about relationship. And you know, I work with a lot of leaders myself, and I always say to them, you know, fundamentally, this is the thing that you need to build with your team. It's a contract essentially between the team and you as a leader, and it's all connected back to, you know, your behavior, your communication style, the interactions that you're having within that team environment. So the more time that you spend with your team, of course, you know, I've seen leaders that are quite aloof from their team, and then they always complain that, you know, they're not getting what they need from their team because they haven't taken those steps, in my view, to build the trust. But it can take a long time in many cases. But I think each interaction you have with that team is kind of like a deposit that you're making into building trust with the team,
Yep.
and that's the way that I tend to look at it. So it's back to relationships.
Absolutely. You could say that your trust account, when it comes to that kind of leading a team, especially in that dynamic, it's one of those situations where the microphone is always on. And we do a bit of
Yeah,
work on the legacy aspect. And one very kind of significantly bad event can very much quickly break trust completely. Whereas building the trust, it's going to be a grind. It's going to be a day to day. It's going to be something progressive. But one of those
yeah,
very kind of significant negative events, and it's kind of done, unfortunately. So that's a great reminder there. Thank you, Matthew. Angela, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say about context really. So it's situational as well. So I've been in many multi-organizational system-wide meetings where, because we've all got the same vision, we've all got, you know, we know where we're heading, that sort of true north, where there has been absolute transparency and trust, and it's gone really well. I've also been in internal individual small team meetings that I've led where there is no trust, because exactly, you know, what Matthew was saying around. So I think there's a lot to do around political awareness. So your the reputation of the people that are in the meeting, how long you've known them. So again, relationship. But I do think there is something about people, because I have seen some people in small internal meetings or in big meetings where they've just said something and you think, oh, political awareness, that's
Yeah,
probably the wrong arena for that comment. So I think that experience as well helps with that. So
absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Angela. You're absolutely right, and I fully agree with that. Kerry, you want to mention something else?
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, I wasn't going to mention this, but Angela, that's really interesting. I totally relate to that as well. And I think what's interesting for younger individuals in an organization, in that setting, in an organizational setting, is that political savviness is really, really hard. You know, for some people, that's a really difficult like path to navigate. And I think a lot of people are at a disadvantage if they don't really have, you know, good political acumen in a corporate setting, and that's something I think leaders really have to consider. The point I was just going to make was action rather than words, or action backing up your words is what I should say. I've spent many years where lots of organizations would talk the talk at a, you know, macro level and at individual leader level, and they, you know, they just, the action backing up their words just was not there. And I think that just, that if there is any trust there, I think that can just erode it very quickly, and definitely doesn't allow it to build.
Absolutely, Kerry. And again, Scott actually mentioned that setting the example is so key to help moving forward. Now, I wanted to start off with this conversation to say that there's also an element of self-learning here, which I thought was, at least for me, when I started to get into these concepts, I found to be very interesting when it relates to trust. You know, yes, we have that kind of, we understand competency-based trust. You know, we have to trust on the skills, the capability to deliver, the follows through with a procedure, relational, you know, trusting enough to speak my voice, my mind, that more emotional, your motives are pure. you know, that tends to happen in terms of our kind of natural self. But then when we talk about what this concept I found very, very interesting is around, you know, if you look at it from a triangle or any kind of model perspective, right, there's some elements that you could say could provide the bigger picture of trustworthiness in general. But that's one way to look at it. But then it's more about, what if we consider trust to be domain specific? You know, from that honesty and integrity side, from the competency perspective, capacity and reliability. You know, I may not trust you with my one of my kind of personal life discussion and things like that. Maybe that's more that kind of emotional, relational trust. But I could definitely be trusting you with being competent to complete a given task or a given kind of aspect. Now, we have these three areas, and we kind of fulfill with a person. It also depends on what we're kind of trusting the other person with or for. So there's elements that really kind of break down trust in a bit further way than the concept that we sometimes relate to it as a very kind of big picture, you could say, orientation towards this word. So that reminder that trust is domain specific, we can kind of trust somebody to do a given task, but not trust them with another. And also the just kind of different elements that build that kind of trusting relationship with somebody. It's good to remember these things, because sometimes we kind of tend to treat trust as this person is trustworthy or they're not. And sometimes, especially we're kind of looking to heal a relationship in the work environment or even in the personal environment, it's really worth understanding that at the end of the day, we all have our strengths and potential limiters, and that trust in itself is a very much a domain-specific construct that if we actually kind of take a step back and not be so, you could say, holistic with it, you know, trustworthy or not, which is, you know, what we tend to hear in the general narrative of things. It's interesting because it can give us a really kind of great second chance to be able to relate better with certain people or work through certain aspects or issues that we may be facing if we deem somebody as untrustworthy, which can be kind of one of a bit of a life sentence in a way. So just something to consider. You know, I certainly, quite frankly, from that kind of blue, yellow emotional space area, if somebody kind of has breached my, you know, trust or they've kind of fallen into that kind of area, it's hard for me to grant trust back. And when I then kind of, you could say, take it a step at a time and say, well, at the end of the day, you know, okay, this happened here in this space, in this domain. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really say anything about this person in another domain. So like, kind of, let's kind of work from that point onward. And that relates in a certain aspect to the whole concept and construct of psychological safety. You know, we're already in an environment where we trust each other and where that, you know, there's a high level of general trust there in terms of where we're at. You know, we can start to expect for people to contribute openly and to feel that as if they were psychologically safe. But there is, of course, more to that than just trust. You know, what are some of the things that you've experienced in the past? Let's just share some really kind of best practices when it comes to feeling in a psychologically safe, you could say, environment. But for me, for example, just as a given example, when I collaborate and work with, particularly with Laura, which some of you may know, who is my sister, but also a, you know, a co-worker at Equilibria and somebody that we've kind of been working together for over 10 years now. In a more personal space, we actually didn't get that well, along that well at all in our growing up years, actually. But when we had that common vision, that common kind of purpose within the organizational framework, helped us get a lot closer together in many other aspects. So when it comes to being psychologically safe, for me, it's about, especially when it comes to feedback, when I hear feedback from her, we're collaborating on something, my interpretation of her intention is always going to be positive. So because that's the kind of the high level of trust is present and established. So there's a very much a psychologically safe sort of built environment, and that is because we grant the best intention to our you know, words or feedback, or you know, what comes across each other, because we have each of our best intentions in mind. Now that's not something that is easy to achieve in a general kind of work environment, but I'm sure you have gotten there in the past. And my question is, what are some things that have gotten you to that place of feeling really satisfied that you can really say anything that you have in mind, be it conflicting, challenging, in that kind of environment. I see Scott mentioned something in the chat here. Small actions towards trust, flow goes way faster. And it's difficult to get back when we're starting to maybe display negativity. Absolutely right.
David, I give you a quick example of that. I was doing some work for Anglo American Mining, and there was a huge gulf. I've said it before in the sessions. There was a huge gulf between the workforce and local management. They couldn't get together. It was just complete negativity from both sides, and I started working with the kind of management level, and trying to get trust, and very quickly you can show by just communication, and communicating in that person's workspace. So taking the time to get hard hat boots and going actually into the workplace and trying to portray that you feel the pain, you understand the challenges, instead of having the conversations in a different arena. You need to show the person you're standing beside them, you understand the pain, you understand the challenges, and although we might not have that golden nugget as in a solution right now, but we're going to get on the right path, and we're going to head in the right direction. So what I mean by small wins, there's things you can do. It takes an hour for at management level to show the trust, and receive some kind of form of trust from a workforce. So until you do that, it's very, very difficult to make headway. So although it takes time, there are small things you can do to get on board.
Absolutely, Scott. In those kind of again, human organizational performance stands, getting inside the tunnel with the employees, really understanding what they're impacted by, really understanding their personal situation, and feeling that they're one more collaborator to making a better sort of environment possible. Not talking down or talking to, just kind of really aligning with them.
You need to remove frustration before you can progress.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely right. And we also have a great few comments here. Jane feeling validated, seen, and heard, and no consequences. Angela, absolutely right. If somebody shares and that vulnerability, or maybe something that is a bit conflicting, and hey, there's no consequences, or even a truthful validation, or a truthful kind of the gratefulness for being empowered to or enabled to share that. Even better, right? So we can kind of contribute to a positive behavioral loop, and people will kind of naturally continue to do that. But that kind of, as you well mentioned, the no consequence to begin with is absolutely essential, right? Because at the end of the day, it shows and demonstrates and sends that clear message. All right, great examples here. So Amy Edmondson, which is really kind of one of the thought leaders in the space of psychological safety, encourage you to read some of her material around this, defines psychological safety as the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So I think that kind of one of the key areas to mention here is around that, you could say, environment to innovate, to continue to move forward, to take those risks. The higher level of psychological safety we have, obviously, the better that's going to be able to take place. Because if we're in that environment whereby we feel like if we say something that's outside the norm, or that we kind of stick our head, the neck's going to kind of get chopped off, then it's very hard to move forward, very hard to kind of consider things differently. It's a lot easier to just very much keep within the comfort zone, keep within the status quo, to just kind of continue to move things forward. And again, it's easy to consider this as a, well, that's something we wouldn't do, or something in general that doesn't tend to happen. But the reality is that's going to be your majority of teams that you interact with are going to be there. And the research, in fact, says that the majority of people, 52%, according to Forbes, I believe, corps of people say that they don't feel psychologically safe at work. And again, I think that this is probably depending on the organization, right? Maybe even low for some organizations, maybe high for some organizations. But what I'm trying to say is that it is a very common, you could say, theme that a lot of people out there don't really feel safe to say what they think or to do as kind of what they really kind of would want to do in that safe space, which is fair enough. Now, why does this matter? Because as we mentioned, when it comes to innovation, when it comes to moving things forward in a way that may be a bit different, or even to stay in an organization, hit their KPIs, there's been a correlation demonstrated between that feeling of feeling safe, psychologically safe, and those elements. Now, again, from a behavioral standpoint, when it comes to psychological safety, it just goes back to that element of really kind of focusing on treating others or giving that experience and following through with our actions. So it says that people won't remember what you said. They may not even remember what you did. However, they'll always remember how you made them feel. And again, the more intentional we are about generating those experiences in terms of how people ultimately feel, the better for everybody involved. The less intentional we are, we may be getting a given set of results, but of course, it's just back to kind of being as intentional as we can with how we're ultimately the experiences that we're giving to others. But of course, this can be very challenging, as at the end of the day, we have to kind of continue with our day-to-day priorities, tasks, etc. But again, we just have to continuously be able to really have that in mind, especially when we're influencing and we're working around other people, and even more so if we're leading teams in a given kind of scenario. Could be that we're leading our families again, could be all kinds of environments, as I mentioned, but that impact we may have in others, really absolutely key. So again, if you're really kind of looking to be successful, and as many great companies are, we want to make people feel safe as much as we can so they do indeed contribute. This is an interesting one around performance standards and psychological safety. And again, wherever you may actually be, as always, anything that we're kind of analyzing these models, it's absolutely okay. It's just a nice little 4-quadrant box to understand, where, we potentially are, where we want to move. And as always, while there is ultimately like it tends to happen in these times of 4-quadrant matrices, top right's always going to be the place to be, but it's really less so about always being there, more about acknowledging where we may be at and taking those actions that may help us get to that spot. So in areas where we have low psychological safety and low performance standards, we may kind of relate to things like apathy, not really, we show up, but really, are we kind of probably going to be choosing our self-protection over really kind of moving above the expected, standard zone? And I think that's a very sort of common one that we can see. If we raise the level of psychological safety, so we look at the top left of the quadrant, but the performance standards continue to be low, very much a comfort zone. Not challenged. We just kind of go there. We're safe in our workplace. We just kind of meet the standard and continue to move forward. Now, again, low psychological safety, but a high performance standard, perhaps a very kind of demanding work environment, very much focused on those objectives and moving that performance standard forward. We can definitely get into that anxiety zone. We have to move work forward, but we're not really feeling safe. We're not really kind of keen on offering our ideas or asking for help. Again, that can be something that may limit us greatly. Top right, high performance standard, high psychological safety. We're in that learning zone. We're collaborating, learning. We're kind of moving towards our desired objectives and figuring out at the end of the day complex works, complex initiatives to move things forward. That requires a lot of collaboration. It requires for us to be vulnerable, share where we're at, and really kind of get to that kind of great sort of alignment in how we work together, and that we can fully contribute who we are to the situation. So again, from an e-colors perspective, and this may be something that we've kind of reviewed in the past, given the different e-colors, what do we need to feel that we are indeed in a psychologically safe environment? This is a survey that we ran some time ago to understand from that kind of different e-color perspective, what do we need from that kind of basic different e-color needs in those environments? Well, again, for the red, we probably want to give a bit more space to get tasks done. We don't want to micromanage, value the independence and ability to accomplish things. For the yellow, of course, perhaps more of a personal touch. Ask how we're doing, share with me struggles, successes, and again, connection on that personal level, probably pretty key. For the green, for example, staying calm, giving that kind of time to process for questions, respecting my questions, letting me know they're important, and again, maybe share some mistakes of their own, explain how doing so led to a positive outcome, and that's likely to resist or to lower the resistance to share when things don't go right, which may be really frustrating for that top color green desire for perfection. For the blue, of course, again, a bit more personal, back to understanding feelings, the needs in the moment, providing those resources so we can create more time. And of course, listening, but, more than just the benefit of the doubt, going to that next level of empathic listening could probably be very key. And on the other side, or another perspective on this question, in terms of what could you do for others to ensure that they're in a psychologically safe environment, so more like actions that we can do for others, we have these here to consider. So again, for the red, although top red may not like to be micromanaged, may have a tendency to do so. So allow others to get work done without going into that micromanagement. Or pause on the tendency to do things by myself, but actually delegating, including, which again may not come naturally. For the greens, perhaps we want to be more aware, or make others aware that the need for information and time to process it, or pressing pause on being overly judgmental or expecting perfection. Again, our green tendency may be to have a very, very high standard or desire for perfection. It may not really be or match others' standards, or not even standards, but more like a vision of what perfect or what kind of good looks like. So having those conversations in terms of, where we want to be at, and then not becoming overly judgmental is definitely key. And then, of course, the yellow, be aware of that over-inclusion and giving people the time and space to work at their cadence, or pressing pause so that others can voice their opinions without interrupting. So really, truly kind of engaging in that empathic or deeper listening. And for the blue, practicing that kind of deep empathic listening, or, really kind of asking to share others, to really get others' concerns, and asking open-ended questions, and really kind of work on not reacting, or working on getting triggered emotionally, which can kind of maybe lead to a shutdown or to disengage with somebody. So again, I think by now we have, you could say, very clear connections with the e-colors and how that relates. But I will say it just continues to be a challenge to really kind of incorporate these concepts into these different aspects when we continue to move things forward. So what I mean is that it's already challenging to be intentional in creating a psychologically safe space. But the next level of challenge, but positive challenge, I mean, is to actually do so in a way that considers other people's e-colors in the process. Now, I did want to make or have, you could say, the opportunity to discuss these 5 principles in a bit more depth, as they themselves also help us to generate and incorporate a culture of psychological safety, or an element within our work. These are the 5 HOP principles, HOP being human organizational performance, which is a very, very interesting, you could say, line of work that relates mainly to the prevention of serious injuries and fatalities. But as any of these tools, we can learn a lot from really kind of understanding how these can be incorporated in our day-to-day lives. Now, I can't go into a lot of depth with these because, there's, few books about these 5 principles. Todd Conklin being one of the thought leaders in this space, our associate and, great collaborator, Rob Fisher, being kind of one of the leaders in how to practically apply these in the organization. This is something that can go deeper, but at the end of the day, it's these principles, especially for senior leaders in organizations, we want to help them incorporate into their thinking, so their actions, their behaviors may start being a bit different, based on really kind of soaking in these 5 principles. Now, these are, again, they come from that space, but if we probably kind of, adapt them to say that these are principles that we can really kind of utilize to be more effective as human beings, it's probably a good thing. And the first one is that error is normal. And what that means, again, in terms of incorporating that, is that we have to accept that human fallibility, humans making mistakes, is going to happen. It's not something that we're doing intentionally. It's something that will happen because it's part of our human nature. These principles, you could say, are more to do with human nature rather than our personality style. It's a little bit more global. It's about understanding as human beings, we have certain elements that are going to be more alike in terms of all of us, than that if we understand these and then add the kind of dynamic of personality style, it's going to be even more powerful. But usually, again, when we talk about error is normal, we're talking about accepting that we are all going to make mistakes. It's normal. Now, that relates to psychological safety greatly because, again, when something goes wrong or when an event happens that is the consequence of an error, we have to accept that there's a very big likelihood that the person that made that mistake just made an honest mistake. It wasn't something that they did intentionally. It wasn't a violation. It wasn't a sabotage, and a lot of things that, unfortunately, our brain usually goes to that kind of blame game. So, for example, a funny one here, if you ever have had if you're in an environment with other people at home, and you leave your keys usually in a given spot, right? I mean, you go in, you leave the keys, in your kind of stuff pile, you could say. I certainly have one when I go into the house. So what tends to happen if you're leaving the house the morning after? And again, of course, you have to have more than a cat for this to be applicable. We also have our pets, but of course they don't do this. And all of a sudden the keys are not there; they're not in the stuff pile. What tends to happen? The natural human reaction is to blame, right? Who took my keys, what happened here, and who was it? Especially, at least for myself, having kids, it's a very common, but it is that instinctive reaction. And we have to understand that while that is part of our human nature, as it relates to that second principle, blame fixes nothing. We can either learn or we can blame. There's really no other way. So if we're blaming, we're not learning. And that's really a key aspect from that kind of psychological safe perspective. If we are indeed in that blame game, we're not going to have the capability to learn effectively, the capability to host and commit to having more advanced psychological safety within our environment. And the rest, especially response matters and learning is essential. Again, they can absolutely build towards that psychological safety aspect. In terms of systems influencing behaviors, that's more of a deeper one, from more like understanding the systems that impact how human beings and behave and the processes alike. But it's also a great way whereby if we're designing an organization and we want to make psychological safety more important, but the system that we have, for example, for rewarding performance has to do with somebody not making mistakes, and there's going to be a bonus financial incentive tied to that KPI. We're setting systems up whereby, as much as we're saying this is important, the system is leading a person down the path of really understanding that, hey, it's not as important because my financial reward is really kind of focused on, 0 mistakes rather than, for example, on honest learning opportunities. So that's obviously going to have an impact on how we behave. So again, a little bit more of an understanding of these kind of principles. It's interesting from a more perhaps in several ways of different impacts to organizations, but it's really kind of key to get a few of those, especially I'd say the whole error is normal and blame fixes nothing. From a more personal perspective, the more that we can incorporate those into our mindset, the stronger, the more resilient we can become when things go wrong and we want to really act as great leaders generating psychological safety. Because the moment we blame, the moment we kind of think that person, that something happened there, they did it because they're against us or because, they have some intentionality behind doing something wrong, that kind of, we really go to that blame fixes nothing. We go to that blame game, which is not going to help us to learn and develop that safe space. All right. So with that said, and today we'll be kind of closing out a little bit sooner than we would usually. We just want to open it up one more time to when we talk about psychological safety, and you know, let's actually cover some of the things that make it difficult for us to speak up. When we're talking about e-colors, if we have already these tendencies, around making it hard to speak up, making it hard to kind of contribute, and we have these in mind, we've got to continue to think of strategies and ways to make it okay for people to jump in, make it okay for people to have those conversations that are difficult. For example, as a talker, if I perceive that it's going to be conflictive, what I have to say, it's going to kind of cause stress in the team, it's going to cause different or a heated argument, I'll probably tend to avoid it. So if you're working with somebody that is a top level, you have to have that very much in mind to be able to help or facilitate an environment where we can kind of successfully jump over that and contribute their thoughts and feedback. For the top red, very differently. They don't want to interrupt the rhythm of the task. Maybe you have to intentionally stop the task, get them out of that kind of you could say focused area, and have that conversation, which is going to be key to move things forward, but just in a very different approach, very different way. And again, this is more to do with those different areas of how different it can become in terms of stopping the job, contributing when we want to contributing and giving feedback. It's a very similar answer. You could say, we take a top color green that doesn't want to be judged, doesn't want to be kind of feeling, just want to have that feeling of, you could say, feeling awkward, with a yellow red that is very different. And again, from a psychological safe perspective, in that yellow red space, it may be more about actually pressing pause and not saying things before it's too late, because it may be kind of that desire to contribute and to say things and move things forward can actually hinder you could say, the performance of the team. So a fine balance to keep in mind when we're really at the end of the day wanting to kind of manage those tendencies and aspects. So again, let's kind of have a wrap-up discussion here. I just want to kind of really have us maybe look more at a personal side of things when we're kind of closing up and we're talking about psychological safety. Let's just have a quick kind of reflection point and share, what are some of the things that we have to really be aware of and managing ourselves to make sure that we're doing our best to contribute to a psychologically safe space in the group that we're leading or being a part of. What is one element that you think you have to continuously check in with yourself, continuously manage to be able to generate that psychologically safe environment? So just want to get some personal reflections on what you kind of need to be doing, and we'll give that kind of a bit of a close for today. So any thoughts? What's one?
Yeah, I'm here, David. Sorry, I was having...
You started, Andy, the sound was on and all of a sudden it shut down.
Can you hear me now?
We can now.
Sorry, my friend. I've just got a new computer. I'm trying to work it out while I'm listening. There's no feedback. No?
No, you're good.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I mentioned in the chat box in the past, a huge sort of aha moment from myself was to, as Mark would say, get over myself and take my ego out of the equation. Because when I used to communicate in the past, I would have, not intentionally, but I'm aware that I used to have the notion that I was putting things across in a really clear manner that everybody should be able to understand. And why do these people not understand what I'm asking of them? It's really very simple. And then having the awareness now of the different language that needs to be addressed to all of the different personality has given me the awareness to be able to broach it in different manners, not take it personally, and understand that I am not, the best communicator in the world. And that is completely, it's a game changer. As I say many, many times, it's just completely changed the way that I interact with everybody on a constantly daily basis.
Absolutely, Andy. Thank you for sharing that. And again, it's I love how this tool helps us at least open the appreciation towards those different filters. And we may even try and adapt to somebody's e-colors and not get it fully right, but at least we're open to consider the fact that our method of communication is not the only method of communication. We all have different filters, and that by really checking in for understanding and getting with people at a level that we're all kind of on the same page and kind of intentionally working through that, communication really improves dramatically. So thank you for sharing that. All right, anybody else, just in closing, just a few practices or things that we want to be very much managing of our own tendencies? Jane, you have your physical hand up. I can see that there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think this is a real, I love this. I'm still new to Equilibria, so I'm still like in that absorption mode of like, oh my God, having all these incredible epiphanies. And I'm just thinking back to my days in corporate, and I worked as an investigator. So everybody in my group were all either ex-police officers or serving police officers, and I just remember some of them being so frustrated with me, and I'm like, they would be like banging their head with me. And now, I can really see they were very, like, as a group, very red greens, that kind of thinking. And I guess I've asked the question before about people with ADHD, whether they tend to fall in specific zones. But I'm just like, the more I learn about Equilibria, the more I think back to my workplace, the more I see that they were very red green. So I guess it's partly a question to you. Do you see, when you go into organizations, do you see like a lot of certain colors in certain organizations? I remember this is going back probably 10 years ago, or actually probably longer than that. We did a personality test. Can't remember what it was, which ones they were, but I remember that it was a big joke because in that group, I was like the black sheep, but I was the red sheep, so completely opposite. Definitely wasn't Equilibria, but they all used to call me the red sheep. Come on, red sheep, come on, come over. And they would really, I realized that they were so stuck in this group thinking, and I would just throw my little idea in there, and they would just almost laugh at me because it was just so out of character, and it's not the way we think, and this is the way we've always done things. Yeah. So that was a long question, but do you find certain groups are clustered with certain colors, like certain professions?
Yeah, I'd say there definitely is, we find anecdotally a correlation. Now, I will say we intentionally don't dissect and publish that information, because then you're getting to influence others more from the perspective of this were to be a profile, and we do a lot of work to fight against that. So what I mean is, if we were to start saying, teachers tend to be, when we find in the results, we find them, by the way, we find all e-colors present in all kinds of roles, organizations, and countries and cultures, but we do also see quite, frankly, an influence in terms of e-colors role and etc. We tend to generally ideate that it's probably because of the law of attraction, you could say, again. So from the perspective, for example, if you think about accounting as a general, very kind of clear picture, that's one that means a lot to me, because a long time ago I did my MBTI, and it said probably that's kind of one of the career paths for me was to be an accountant. And with all respect to that kind of profession, it felt very limiting. And again, actually, I did end up doing quite a bit of financial, you could say, analysis sort of things like that. And I do kind of enjoy that. Okay, it may work for my personality, but out of principle, just out of decision, I didn't really kind of appreciate that a tool would sort of profile me into say we're from a career perspective. So we don't publish that type of information, but we do see an influence. And we do believe that it may be because a bit of attraction, right? I mean, a good example, we work with very big engineering organizations. There is a lot of green and blue within those from the perspective of that detail orientation. Now, have we met and do we know yellow, red, yellow engineers? Absolutely. But is there, you could say, a predominance? Frankly, yes, there, from what we've observed, there is, right? I mean, and in nursing, for example, is there maybe a little bit more of a top color blue from what we've anecdotally seen from that kind of perspective of taking care of others, either top or secondary, but that kind of empathy, relationness, and taking care of somebody. We have seen that, yes, indeed. So it's all over, but I will say there is a little bit of a relationship that you can't kind of negate. You can't say it doesn't exist. I hope that answers your question, Jane. Very good. Thank you. And again, some other answers that we have in the chat box here around the Britley, for example. If I knew the answer or solution, I want to speak up and solve it immediately. I had to pause and allow others to give input first. Thank you, Britley, for sharing that. And again, it's just such a great example of maybe a bit of a different perspective from that red perspective, whereby the non-action or not saying, not speaking up actually is what facilitates psychological safety, because it gives people the chance to contribute, get that experience, understand that it's okay to do so. So that shows a lot of intentionality from a non-action perspective rather than actually doing or saying something. And Seri, reluctance to speak up and taking things personally, again, managing that can definitely lead to a more effective approach from a psychological safety perspective. So with that said, I think it's really a good time to close out for today. I really appreciate the opportunity to deliver this. It's always very enjoyable. And especially as we continue on in these calls, it's, I think, really great that we continue to develop the conversation as a group, that we continue to bring concepts forward, that we continue to push things forward, expand our sphere of influence so we can invite others to these events and kind of keep moving things forward. That's really, we want to build this nice community whereby, hey, we may not be dramatically changing the topics every so often, but it's just about advancing the conversation and really bringing what we have to the table. It may be in the future that we even experiment with somebody sharing that, hey, they have a little bit of an issue in psychological safety here with this team. What can we do? And we actually kind of work things out as a group. This is what we're seeking to create. So really appreciate your time today. Really kind of thankful for the opportunity to be here, and looking forward to being part of the next future sort of sessions to come. So thank you, and have a really great rest of your day.
Thank you, David.
Everyone. Bye.
Hasta luego.
Thank
Hasta
you.
luego. Gracias. All right, Jovita, I gotta head out. Have a great day.
Very